He woke up inside his favorite game in the body of some random noble, completely removed from the main story. All he wanted was to live in a calm and discreet way, without drawing attention or raising unnecessary suspicions. But on the very first day, he came face to face with the final boss. Suddenly, all the villains, demonic vessels, and true walking warning signs began to show a strange obsession with him. The closer to death he got, the stronger and absurdly irresistible he became. If fate wanted to see him dead, why did all the villains insist on falling in love with him? The so-called butterfly effect says that the fate of all humanity can be altered by an apparently insignificant event. In Dao's opinion, this phenomenon was simply terrible. After all, up until that moment, he had only committed small actions that he already deeply regretted. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the door and by Elnor's voice, who called him cutie while asking if he was listening. She knew perfectly well that he was in there. It would be more prudent to open the door politely before the situation got worse. She had already interrogated Elia, the gatekeeper, who had confirmed that he did not have any classes scheduled for that day. Did he really intend to ignore her forever? The protagonist felt a shiver of unease. Pursuers like that were rare, and not in a positive way. Since she got no response, the girl decided to try a slightly more direct approach. She drove the sword into the door, announced that she would force her way through, and he began to seriously suspect that she had lost her mind. Desperate to stop her, he shouted far too excitedly, "Isn't this against the rules, since the student council president was supposed to punish anyone who disrespected basic regulations?" She swung the sword repeatedly, reducing the door to pieces, then kicked it, crossed the destroyed entrance and declared, to his misfortune, that she was precisely the student council president. He had to cover his face to avoid being hit by the wood splinters, while she asked how many more times he planned to run away from her. He had ignored her 32 times, an almost admirable number. Shocked, he asked if she was really counting. She approached, glared at him irritably, and repeated the main question. He was going to marry her. Far too excited for someone under threat, he asked her to have a little patience. At that moment, Saris's voice echoed beside him, calling Elnor Princess Tristan and questioning what kind of nonsense she was saying. She even had the audacity to bother another man in front of everyone. So that was how her family handled things. Saris stared at her coldly and asked if that place was too bright for an assassin to act freely. Besides, there were witnesses everywhere. Elnor replied by sticking out her tongue and stating that it was enough to eliminate them all. That was the code she lived by. Dao became extremely nervous and declared that they were putting him in an impossible situation. He had not even considered the idea of marriage. As if that were not enough, another woman crossed through the bedroom ceiling with her imposing body. It was Lilu. All eyes immediately turned to her and she smiled at Dao and asked him to choose her. According to her, everything was already prepared for the wedding. He only needed to go with her. Upon hearing the crash, Yura ran to the place, brandishing her chains against the rivals and calling it complete rudeness. Turning to Dao, she asked what he was doing to attract only arrogant women around him. As his fiancée, she could not simply watch that with her arms crossed. And as if the dispute were not already crowded enough, yet another candidate appeared, the fire sorceress Finol, who invaded the room ordering everyone to be silent. Dao Campbell belonged to her. Faced with that absurd scenario, there was only one alternative left: turn everything into a competition. The girls began to fight among themselves, and the protagonist, trapped in the center of the chaos, shouted, "Why can these girls only hear themselves?" And thus the inevitable question arises, how did he end up in that situation? To understand, it was necessary to go back a little in time, to the day he found the survival game responsible for everything. The name of the game was Savior Rising. The story followed energetic college youths full of energy and that typical youthful freshness. The game had a clearly otaku aesthetic, although its characters were surprisingly familiar and stable. As he did with any title he liked, he cleared the game and watched the ending feeling that mixture of joy and a sense of accomplishment. Then, in a totally unexpected way, the next day it happened. He woke up in Dao's body. As soon as he opened his eyes, he thought, what the hell is going on? Since he had not even criticized the game enough to irritate some omnipotent developer, nor did he have any special attachment to the original protagonist. In simple terms, he now inhabited the body of Dao Campbell. And the worst part was that he did not possess any special power. In practice, he was just a third-rate extra in that world. His father was a simple viscount of common and safe agricultural lands, like the many scattered throughout the empire. Those properties were barely mentioned in the game's scenes. Even so, the viscount's son enrolled in the Imperial Academy, and from that point on, the story took a different turn. Before leaving home, he said goodbye to his father. The viscount cried bitterly, reluctant to part with his pride and joy, and asked him to take care of himself and avoid trouble. Alfante was the place where young people of noble blood gathered to study. For the son of a modest viscount, the best thing to do was not to attract unnecessary attention. He smiled nervously and stated that he understood perfectly. It was then that the system appeared before him. The interface displayed his attributes, all shamefully low. Skills, mastery, and special talents simply did not exist. That screen left him uneasy. Even being a veteran in games, he had never seen such disastrous starting statistics. His main mission was to enroll in the academy and be assigned to Class A. According to the game mechanics, ignoring the main mission meant an inevitable game over. As Alfante would plunge into chaos, devastated by the atrocities of malicious characters, he could not put his dreamed peaceful life at risk. For that reason, he swore to his father that he would do his best not to draw attention, nor feed unrealistic dreams of raising the Viscount's prestige. The father hesitated, since that was not exactly the intention of his advice. Even so, he promised that he would keep his grades a little below average so that no one would care about his presence. What kind of protagonist tries to solve everything alone? If there was something he could do on his own, it was precisely to go unnoticed. Let his student life begin then. The only means of transport between his house and the academy was a train. By a not at all comforting coincidence, Elnor was traveling in the same car. Throughout the entire trip, seated in the same cabin, he could not avoid observing her every movement. His nervousness only increased. Everything in that world revolved around the role she played. Elnor was cruel. Elnor carried mountains of corpses in her past. Elnor Elise Latristan, she was the final boss of that world. According to the original script, she would face the protagonist until finally going insane. The ancestral essence of the gray demon inside her slowly consumes her body and leads her to the inevitable transformation into the final boss, who must be faced by the very protagonist who triggered all of this. Elnor realized that he had been observing her for too long, and without even taking her eyes off the book, asked if she should call a doctor, since his appearance did not look the best. His expression really left much to be desired. Nervous, he replied that he was fine, and she commented that the Duke of Tristan cared deeply about the palace's public image, therefore placing her in a common carriage, instead of a first-class one, had been a calculated decision to demonstrate closeness to the people. She even apologized for any inconvenience. She said she was used to seeing that same expression on the faces of people who had the opportunity to travel in the same carriage as her. He was surprised by those words. She was different from the memory he had. In the game, she used to be described as arrogant, authoritarian, and obsessed with perfection. Could there really be a gentle side there? As he remained silent, she asked if there was something wrong. Was there anything else bothering him? He smiled awkwardly and said that everything was fine. He just did not expect her to be so gentle. She raised her eyes from the book and looked at him directly, asking what kind of expectation he had created about her. At that moment, he realized that he had spoken too much, and she questioned if they even knew each other. Worried, he replied that he had only heard comments saying that she was quite strict. She returned her attention to the book and sighed, concluding that he was strange. Embarrassed, he explained that that was really all he had heard. After that, he reminded himself that he was just a secondary character, and that he did not have the right to get involved with her. He then decided to stay quiet, staring fixedly out the window. The landscape was magnificent, and the floating stones made everything even more beautiful. It was then that he realized that there should not be flying stones there, much less wrapped in flames, and his eyes widened at the same instant. He called the student council president and threw himself over her, asking forgiveness in advance. In the very next second, a huge flaming stone crashed down onto the train, causing a devastating explosion. Thanks to the skeleton armor, an artifact that Elnor always carried with her, he was not crushed. Even so, he held her tighter, apologizing mentally. With F-level attributes, surviving that on his own would be impossible. She, on the other hand, showed only slight surprise. When everything finally ceased, she asked if he was fine and if he could release her, since he was quite heavy. Upon realizing that he was lying on top of her, with his face pressed against her chest, he got up in a hurry and apologized, completely embarrassed. She looked away with apparent indifference, and stated that there was no problem at all. After all, he had tried to save her. It was the first time she had been so close to a man, but she still felt gratitude. As she understood his intentions, there was no need for more apologies. In truth, Dao had only run to her because of the protective artifact, but he decided to keep that detail to himself. After that, she stood up, adjusted her hair and asked his name. He hesitated to answer because he sensed that that would prolong the conversation. Maybe he should have asked what would happen if he said his name, but the system decided to act on its own. Without realizing it, he spoke his name, and she stated that she would remember him, and that she would reward him in the future. The system then informed that he had attracted the villain's attention. The conditions for a special gift had been fulfilled. He now possessed the skills Desperate Survival and Deadly Charm. Stunned, he stared at the invisible screen without understanding how he had reached that point. Shortly after, several ambulances arrived to assist the train in flames. Apparently, the attack had occurred because the train was heading to Alfonte. But thanks to the security measures, there were almost no civilians on board, so only Dao came out truly injured. He was placed in another carriage and received first aid immediately. Even without anyone touching him yet, he screamed in pain as if he were being taken apart piece by piece. After that, they kindly offered transportation to the victims to the city. During the route, he opened the system to check his new rewards. The first listed item was the Luck Amulet. That amulet granted rewards whenever he attracted the attention of villains. It was no surprise that he had never unlocked that before, no matter how much he tried to understand the conditions. In the Campbell Viscounty, that quiet and almost irritatingly happy place, villains simply did not exist. Not even neutral villains showed their faces there. For that reason, the gift had remained hidden until then. He decided to analyze the other abilities. Desperate Survival would increase his attributes according to necessity, varying according to the level of the threat, while Deadly Charm would make it much easier to attract the attention of villains. The more extreme the situation, the more powerful the effect would be. He concluded that Desperate Survival would be extremely useful in battle, and would probably help him stay alive. But what exactly was the practical usefulness of the so-called Deadly Charm? His eyes stopped on the description about attracting villains more easily, and a chill ran down his spine. Among those villains, there was an insane warrior who lived only for battle. A completely unbalanced sword goddess, ready to cut down anyone who approached 3 steps beyond what was allowed. A ruthless assassin who killed for money, and a genius woman crushed by her own circumstances. Tears appeared in his eyes. Those women were dangerously problematic. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, he thought, maybe it is not so bad after all. The important thing is that now I have a survival skill. It is just strange that its classification does not appear anywhere. I have played this for so long and never seen anything like this. What does that mean? Asked the doctor, who had been observing him for some time, showing doubt about his mental state and whether he should examine him again. He replied that he was fine and left the carriage. He soon realized that they had stopped exactly at the entrance of the academy where he would enroll. During the admission ceremony, while an endless speech echoed through the hall, he thought, before getting here, the doctor commented that I would travel with Princess Tristan. I am only the son of a viscount without connections, right? He also studied in Alphonte and belongs to a lesser nobility. Does he really believe that stone fell by accident? Since the Tristan family had countless enemies, and getting involved with them certainly was not healthy, but when the system warned that he had attracted attention, it was already too late, because without realizing it, he had ended up directly involved with her. In an academy full of gossip and intrigues, it was not surprising that she had become a strong candidate for the position of final boss. Even breathing near her could be considered a fatal risk. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed through the hall, completely interrupting his thoughts. It was the professor. As everyone had already found a training partner except him, some students began to laugh and call him a country bumpkin, but he preferred to ignore the provocations and remembered that the practical test would take place right after the entrance ceremony. The professor announced that since he had not managed to form a pair, he would personally assign his opponent. Forcing a nervous smile, he asked who had been chosen, imagining that if everyone was already in pairs, probably the strongest would still be left over. A friendly female voice pulled him from his thoughts. She extended her hand toward the arena and with a gentle smile asked if he needed help. As soon as he saw her, his nervousness increased upon recognizing her. His opponent was Ilya Krasanex, a world-level genius, future savior and protagonist of the game Savior Rising. He shook her hand and realized that the situation was far from favorable. Meanwhile, in the student council, the atmosphere was tense, as everyone awaited the arrival of Lady Tristan. The council secretary Beatrix rested her head on her hand and wondered, exhausted, if she was going crazy. The admission exam duels were about to begin, and even so she was late. Some students questioned when Lady Tristan would finally appear, and at that exact instant the office door opened, revealing Elnor's entrance. Her presence, however, caused a slight alarm among those present. She drove the sword into the table where Beatrix was seated, but the secretary ignored the gesture and said that she had many questions, starting with where she had been all this time. Elnor replied firmly that she had been handling a matter, and Beatrix, sighing deeply, asked everyone to leave, since she needed to deal with that issue in private. Next, she asked if there had been victims, and Elnor replied that about 12 people were involved. Someone had tried to assassinate her by throwing a stone against the academy train, trying to make it look like an accident. She identified the culprits quickly and eliminated them without hesitation. Beatrix commented that that should have been left under the academy's responsibility, but Elnor only replied that dealing with that was stressful. Did they really expect her to act like a good girl and simply forgive those who tried to kill her? Deciding not to prolong the discussion, Beatrix told her to change clothes before anything else. The candidates' duels were about to begin. If she hurried, she could still intercept Ilya, that rare genius. She was fighting against someone called Dao. Elnor asked if it was really Dao. Beatrix confirmed and asked if they knew each other, adding that there was nothing particularly special about him. But Elnor remembered the awkward smile he had given her and commented with slight amusement that he was somewhat eccentric. Meanwhile, the protagonist remained in the arena, trembling with fear under the gazes of the audience. Some still called him a country bumpkin and were only waiting for an embarrassing spectacle. He analyzed his opponent and thought that his own attributes were terrible. If he were hit directly, he would be finished. Even so, maybe that could turn into an advantage. After all, that was a dangerous fight. He had nothing to lose since he possessed the desperate survival skill. His attributes would increase according to necessity. The effect varied according to the level of the threat. He observed the crowd of students and thought that surely there were villains among them. Of that he had no doubt. If he survived, he would manage to attract their attention. That would give him room to grow in attributes, which meant greater chances of staying alive. Upon noticing that he was trembling, Ilya called him and asked him to be honest. He was very weak, was he not? Not knowing what to answer, he remained silent, and she interpreted that as confirmation. She wanted to attack him, but like that, she feared that he would not withstand the first blow. Shocked, he asked why she was doing that. She replied that he was the man who had traveled with Eris from the Tristan family, and that she hated that entire family, not only Eris. To her, they were true demons. He thought that accusation was quite bold. Although, being honest with himself, she was not entirely wrong. According to the story, she had numerous reasons to hate the Tristans. He understood that complicated family dramas existed, but they had only shared the same carriage. When he said that out loud, she replied that that statement made her remember herself. That irritated her even more, so she decided to vent her anger on him, although she preferred to pretend that that was just a normal duel. The proposal seemed tempting to Dao, but if he did not evolve quickly, his own life would be at risk. Therefore, that was his only chance to obtain immediate recognition. With a trembling voice, he replied that she could vent everything on him. After all, he really liked her. The girl's gaze changed at the same instant. She gripped the sword tightly and asked, "Is he serious?" Although in fact he was not. Even so, That was the only way to make her fight with everything, and he provoked even more, saying that his declaration was as serious as the hatred she felt for him. The system then informed that Deadly Charm had been activated. The villain's attention on him had increased drastically, and a new reward had been added to the list. Ilya declared that she would not hold back anymore, and advanced immediately, brandishing the weapon and splitting his wooden sword in half. The blow almost hit his face, but he managed to duck in time. She widened her eyes upon realizing that he had dodged. Maybe he was not as weak as he seemed. Determined to test that, she increased the force and attacked again. At that moment, the system began to pour notifications before his eyes. Threat detected, but not fatal. Desperate survival activated at level EX. He realized that he could not just keep dodging and enduring the attacks. Then he counterattacked and struck the girl directly in the face. When he realized that level EX represented the maximum possible power, it was already too late. Ilya was launched out of the arena at extremely high speed and collided against the wall with a deafening crash. He and everyone present were in shock, and at that instant, he had probably also gained the attention of several villains spread throughout the academy. That was how Dow Campbell and Frank, according to the statistical records, defeated a world-level talent on the very first day of class. Meanwhile, the Academy Board closely followed the admission exams. Conrad Baltador, director of the night course, commented that that candidate was probably just a skillful swindler. His colleague observed that he had changed his opinion too quickly about the boy. He then declared that, if it was not fraud, that would be completely absurd. Anyone who had watched would realize that, moments before the duel, he showed no strength or skill whatsoever, and yet he had delivered a blow impossible to ignore. No one in Alfante would be capable of facing something of that magnitude, not even he himself. The chances of defeating Ilya, potential future heroine, should be practically non-existent. Perhaps he had used a forbidden potion, some illegal tool, or any other questionable method to temporarily increase his strength. Of course, there was also the small possibility that he was simply a monstrous genius beyond common comprehension. For a few seconds, absolute silence took over the assembly hall. After that, the Academy Director Adalante Swansong stated that his victory was difficult to explain in a logical way. Margarov Kendrid, Ilya's sponsor, however, did not accept the result so easily. The Academy also could not simply ignore someone who demonstrated genius potential. For that reason, they decided that it would soon become clear whether he was a fraud or not. It was enough to keep observing his next steps carefully. One of those present questioned what kind of benefit that would bring to the institution, and Adalante replied that this year there were many interesting newcomers. Some were so singular that they required a differentiated approach. If that student really had something special, as the event suggested, he would naturally find his space among them. Soon after, the news of Dao's overwhelming victory spread through all the newspapers, although the photo chosen to illustrate the article was not favorable at all. Upon seeing it, he thought, "This news is everywhere. Are they serious?" While the system notified him that his profile had been updated with a new reward. Elnor's trust level had risen to level 2. Baron, Armit, Viscount, Looper, and many others began to show interest in him, which earned him a considerable amount of points. From what he understood, first he needed to attract attention, then awaken interest, and finally earn trust. It remained to know if he could spend those accumulated points in the system shop. Elnor still possessed the highest affection level among all, but how had the final boss, who theoretically should not care about him, reached that level of trust? Next, the system informed that he had received a reward from Elnor, the Tristan family swordsmanship technique. That surprised him greatly, since the family was widely recognized for its excellence with the sword. The problem was that the name Tristan was also linked to demons, but at that point, what difference did it make? Ilya also started to appear on his character sheet. At the moment, her curiosity was at level 4. Even so, that was not enough to unlock any reward. He was surprised to realize that he had not understood that detail before. The gifts were granted only by villains who showed interest in him. Ilya was not a villain, and therefore he neither needed nor could activate that type of benefit with her. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door echoed, making him almost jump from his place. A voice from the other side asked if Dao lived there. He immediately had the feeling that he knew that voice. Right after that, the person identified herself as Ilya. She asked if she could come in. That left him surprised and nervous at the same time. What would she be doing there at that hour? Maybe if he remained completely silent, she would simply go away. However, the girl pressed her ear against the door and stated that she knew he was inside. She kept knocking with her fists and threatened that, if he did not answer, she would come in by force. Indignant, he muttered that she was crazy, and she shot back asking if that meant he really was inside and if he would finally open the door. She said that she needed to talk to him. Nervous, he asked what she wanted, and she replied that since everything had reached that point, she wished to get to know him better. He was completely shocked by that answer. That was very far from the outcome he had imagined. As he remained silent again, she declared that she would not stay waiting like a dog in front of the door and left annoyed, saying that she would not leave things like that because he irritated her deeply. While walking away, she remembered that, after the defeat in the arena, he had offered her friendship while she was being taken to the infirmary, and concluded that there was something very strange about that boy. She also realized that she had no idea how to be friends with a boy. Distracted with those thoughts, she did not notice the person walking in front of her and ended up bumping into her, dropping the bag she was carrying. Ilya immediately bent down to pick up the object, but the other girl, visibly irritated, said that she should pay more attention to where she was walking. Ilya tried to apologize, however when she raised her eyes she became completely paralyzed. Elnor was standing before her. Elnor extended her hand and asked if she was hurt, but Ilya remained silent, taken by the memories of her brother. In the memory, an immense column of fire rose before them, while Tristan remained firm to protect her. Ilya's expression became somber. She said that she was fine and at that moment realized that she had instinctively tightened her grip on the sword handle. Would she be able to defeat her at her current level? Elnor leaned down to pick up the fallen bag, and Ilya watched her with surprise, imagining that her hostile reaction had certainly been noticed. So why did she remain silent? Or was it a way of implying that she did not even consider her a threat worthy of response? Ilya asked her to return the package, and Elnor handed it over with slightly trembling hands, without understanding how Dao had gotten involved in that. After that, Elnor moved on, and Ilya commented that Dao's room was at the end of the corridor. When she was preparing to leave, Elnor stopped her and asked how she knew where his room was. Upon hearing that she was coming precisely from there, Elnor frowned and questioned the reason for her visit. Without understanding why that question sounded so loaded, Ilya smiled awkwardly and replied that she only wanted to be his friend, like a freshman trying to get close to another freshman. Elnor stated sternly that freshmen were forbidden to interact with men, and Ilya, confused, asked if that rule really existed. Elnor replied that the rule had just been created. From that moment on, Ilya was forbidden from approaching his room. Still perplexed, Ilya asked what exactly Elnor's relationship with Dao was, and she, continuing to walk, replied that she had no relationship with him. Even so, she said that Ilya should remember her words well. Ilya recalled what Dao had said in the arena and concluded that there was definitely something between them. At least to obtain information, she would need to get close to him one way or another. Time passed. The Elfante Academy leveling exam aims to carry out a thorough analysis of each student's aptitudes. After an individual duel, everyone is divided into groups, and, as the protagonist defeated a world-renowned genius, he ended up being assigned to the elite class. Everyone there displayed proud and confident expressions, only he, however, trembled with fear inside. The biggest problem for him had a name and a face. Ilya constantly pursued him as if that were her new life mission. Yesterday he had struck her, and to make the situation worse, now the two were in the same group. Upon checking the character's information, he discovered that her curiosity level kept rising, and that the probability of her becoming interested in him had also increased. As Ilya was an important character, it would be enough for her affection level to change for a special event to be activated. He simply could not understand what was happening, nor why her interest only kept growing. The night before, someone had left some sweets under the door of his room, along with a note wishing him good luck on the next day's tests. In other words, apparently he had a secret admirer, which under normal circumstances could be flattering, but in that context sounded more like stalking. Why did everything seem to conspire to put him in trouble? The professor called the first group and he sighed deeply, reminding himself that he needed to focus on the test. In theory, nothing extraordinary should happen. After all, that was part of the main plot and should follow the script. The system notified him that as Elnor's trust level had reached level 2, a new event would be released soon. And as if she had been summoned by fate itself, she appeared. It was then discovered that Elnor would be responsible for supervising that test. He cast a discreet glance in her direction and concluded that it definitely was not a coincidence. He knew that an event involving Elnor was about to occur, but it would be strange if nothing happened when she herself was the one directly in charge of the evaluation. In fact, that entire situation had been orchestrated by the Academy administration. Curious to observe his performance in the class's upcoming activities, they decided to assign the student council president to supervise everything closely. Elnor waved her hand and invited the students to teleport first to the testing field. She informed that she would answer any questions as soon as everyone reached the destination. While they walked, a boy named Luca looked around in surprise, commenting that the enormous investment made in the construction of the place was evident. His friend asked him to stay quiet and just follow him, and soon everyone found themselves in a dark and silent corridor. The students looked around with enthusiasm, commenting that the place was really impressive. They approached the statue positioned in the center of the room. Ilya reminded Elnor that she had promised to answer their questions as soon as they arrived there, so that was part of the test. Elnor remained silent because none of that was in accordance with the original plan, and Dao concluded that perhaps he could answer on his own. Suddenly the entrance was sealed and the lights went completely out. The system announced that Elnor's event was beginning, and he sighed deeply upon realizing that it was not a simple test, but a carefully prepared trap. It was in fact an assassination attempt. The assassins who had survived earlier were still pursuing Elnor, and now he needed to protect her. The silence of the student council president left everyone apprehensive, until one of the students suggested that they should leave before something worse happened. The protagonist remained behind, carefully observing each member of the group. They all were part of the main circle of the story, and if he remembered the script correctly, it was there that they would officially meet. Those people in that room would play important roles in future events. He pointed to the map behind him, and suggested that the best course would be to head toward the central hall. The students were surprised to realize that the map had been there the whole time, and he explained that the central hall could contain useful equipment and other necessary supplies. In addition, because it was a wide space, it would facilitate defense in case of attack. His last words caused an atmosphere of tension among some students. Dao then turned to the president and to Ilya, stating that they had probably already realized the situation. They definitely were not alone there. Everyone remained silent when he declared that he would stay behind, and I immediately asked the reason. He replied that it was necessary, and she exclaimed indignantly, "Why?" even knowing that they were already far from the main hall. With a serious expression, he stated that he could not explain at that moment, but that it was something important. He said that he would reveal the details later, and in fact it was really important, therefore he was not lying. What could be more urgent than ensuring one's own survival? As soon as the group departed, he let out a sigh of relief. His previous victory over Ilya seemed to have given more weight and credibility to his words. He then decided to hide until all that confusion came to an end. After all, the real target was Elnor, and the assassins showed no interest in him. He hid in a dark corner and waited patiently. But as always, the system had other plans. Suddenly, the voice of a man echoed behind him, saying that he needed to fix a lamp. The stranger asked if he could point out the way. He claimed to be having difficulty orienting himself in the darkness. The system immediately identified a threat, although the subject's sinister face already gave that away without the need for warning. Meanwhile, the group reached the main hall, where Trisha asked Ilya if she believed Dao could handle that situation alone. And if something went wrong, Ilya replied that he certainly had some plan in mind. Moreover, at that moment, they needed to focus on their own safety. The assassins had been hidden in the ceiling beams from the beginning, and Elnor had already noticed their presence a long time ago. Meanwhile, the protagonist guided the suspicious man down the corridor with an ironic smile, thinking that the advanced team would already have been eliminated by that worm if he were not there. He deceived the subject with almost embarrassing ease. Dao led him to the entrance of the supply room and reflected that a professional assassin should be able to assess someone's level just by observing their movements, and that individual was far from seeming professional. He decided that he would play a little before eliminating him. The man's body would serve as excellent bait for Lady Tristan. Upon hearing a strange noise behind him, the protagonist turned and saw the man in front of him tear off the disguise and draw a knife, announcing that it was time to receive his reward. To the attacker's surprise, he merely sighed in relief and said that it was just him. Hazmid. The man stared at him in confusion and commented that if it were someone stronger, he would have already freaked out in fear. He also added that it was a relief to recognize him by the way he walked and by the fact that he no longer sniffled like before. He continued being the same old man as always. His desperate survival ability had now reached level A. The man ground his teeth, irritated, not understanding what kind of absurdity he was hearing. Even without words, he concluded that he was still weak and that he could defeat him quickly. Next, Dao drew his weapon, a sturdy staff, and advanced against Hazmid, while in the main hall the students faced the assassins and managed to defeat them quickly. Some students even became surprised upon realizing that the assassins were much weaker than they had imagined. Ilya turned to Pallas and asked him to freeze them immediately while wondering where Elnor could be at that moment. At the same time, Elnor had already given a real lesson to another group of assassins using her refined sword technique. With a single precise movement, she hurled them violently against the wall. The impact was so brutal that blood spurted from the mouth of some of them. When one of the men fell to the ground, Elnor drove the sword into his hand without hesitation and asked in a threatening tone if there were still more allies nearby. He screamed in pain and she coldly stated that she would break his neck if he did not answer. After that, the survivors had their hands handcuffed with ice, and one of them revealed the existence of Hazmid of the Crescent Moon. Elnor wanted to know if he was inside the building or in the surroundings, but the man said that he could not reveal that information. Without wasting time, she struck him and pressed his head against the floor, asking if that assassin was already among them. He screamed again when the pressure increased and confessed that Hazmid had come along with the group. Ilya questioned why they would reach such boldness, and Elnor replied that the objective was to kill her. Hazmid of the Crescent Moon was known for assuming the appearance of those he killed, so who could be the easiest target for him in that scenario? Ilya immediately thought of a single person and asked, so Dao offered himself as bait to attract the strongest opponent while these assassins came after you. Why would he do all that? What really was happening between them? Elnor stated that there was nothing between them, at least nothing of which she was aware. Ilya frowned, clearly suspicious. Meanwhile, Hazmid began to feel the pressure of the situation. He prided himself on being an experienced professional assassin. However, in that place there was the soul of a guardian, a special barrier that prevented the use of weapons. And the most curious thing was that the barrier reacted only to conventional weapons. So where did that unexpected advantage come from? The academy was ancient and surrounded by mysteries, therefore perhaps that was not so surprising after all. Even so, he remembered that he was an assassin and in theory a living weapon by himself. So why was he being beaten with a simple staff as if he were just any amateur? The protagonist advanced once again and delivered a powerful blow, while the system informed that he had mastered the movements successfully and increased the effectiveness of the Tristan family's fencing technique. Hazmid exhaled with difficulty and thought, is this really a Tristan fencing technique? He also concluded too late that he should not have provoked that guy. Trying to recover his breath after so many blows, he accused him of having deceived him, who he really was. At that instant, the deadly spell was activated, and the villain shuddered at the unexpected precision of the plan. In fact, there was a save point in that room, and the protagonist had lured him there precisely because the system blocked the use of weapons in the place. Hasmond let out a short laugh and said that they probably would not get any answer from him. If that was the case, then kill him already. He replied that he did not need to kill him. It was enough that he would transmit to the others the message not to approach Lady Tristan, and added that even an experienced assassin like him was on the verge of death. He believed he did not know who the client behind the attack was, but he was sure that they would not give up, which only increased the probability that the demon sealed in Elnor would be released. For that reason, he needed to eliminate that opportunity once and for all. Hasmond smiled with disdain and asked what would happen if he returned. He replied in a threatening tone that he would beat him again because he would continue protecting her next time as well. Hasmond then questioned why she was so important to him. He reflected for a brief moment, and at that exact moment the man cast a glance backward while the system informed that the deadly spell had been activated and that the villain's favor was growing rapidly. At that instant, Elnor had entered the room and heard the entire conversation, which was why the system now bombarded him with notifications. He turned confused, not understanding what was happening, and saw her standing there. A new day dawned and Beatrix was simply horrified by the situation. She hid her face over the desk and declared that all of that was a complete mess. Although she understood the rector's position, she immediately set out to locate the responsible organizer because she already had too much work accumulated. The academy was immersed in a real chaos. That meant that there were spies infiltrated among them. It was those spies who facilitated the enemy's entry and bought time for the assassination attempt. She told Elnor that she understood that due to the political disputes, she would become a frequent target, but that was already the second attempt on her life. The enemy's persistence was simply unbelievable. Elnor, however, looked at the ceiling with a distant expression, agreeing distractedly and commenting that that incident seemed a little different from the previous ones. Whoever was behind that would probably try again. The students who had been by her side were revered as heroes and accepted the recognition without questions. Everyone, except Dao, he did not receive even a single word of thanks. Why was he not celebrating together with the others? Beatrix saw no logic in that attitude. It seemed that he deliberately avoided any kind of attention from the academy. She agreed with that observation and, irritated, stated that if Elnor kept agreeing without paying attention, she would end up getting slapped. Elnor replied that she could do whatever she wanted. Furious, Beatrix threw an inkwell in her direction and exclaimed, "What is wrong with you?" Elnor, who did not manage to catch the object in time, merely repeated the question with a distracted air. Beatrix replied that she had spent the entire day lost in thoughts and could not concentrate. "Why can't I concentrate?" She herself admitted that she had no idea what was happening to her. Beatrix retorted that if she did not explain, she could not help her. After hesitating, Elnor confessed that she was very interested in someone, and the girls stared at her in surprise, imagining that they had understood wrong. They asked who exactly was awakening that interest, and Elnor replied that she had already mentioned his name recently. It was Dao Campbell. Elnor remained silent, while Beatrix raised an eyebrow, perplexed, and asked in an incredulous tone if she had really become interested in that bumpkin. Elnor observed that she had never said anything about liking him, but the other girl retorted that she did not know what he had done to leave her like that and that it was better to imagine what the Archduke's reaction would be when he found out. Elnor calmly put away the inkwell and stated that the old geezer would not be pleased with that at all, besides reinforcing that she was not in love with him. Beatrix, of course, did not believe a single word and, bringing her hands to her head with a tired expression, asked, "Anyway, he was kind to you, wasn't he?" Remembering that she normally would have suspected him from the beginning, she added that Elnor needed to be more cautious as the lady of the House of Tristan. Elnor agreed but explained that she had already tested him. Even so, she would continue to watch him closely. Beatrix did not understand exactly what she meant by that. Meanwhile, the protagonist read the letter received and the content left him completely perplexed. The Academy administration informed that unfortunately they still could not assign him to a specific class. The team was working hard to make the correct decision, therefore he should await further instructions. He murmured, "I was not expecting anything too much, they could simply put me in a common class and close the matter." In practice, by the rules, he should have been assigned to a special class just like the entire group of Elia. Why had only he been excluded from that designation? At that moment, a sequence of system messages appeared before his eyes. The first main task had been successfully completed. The information was automatically updated. A new main task was activated. He needed to resolve the incident that would occur during the first-year selection ceremony. As a reward, he would receive exclusive equipment. The first-year selection ceremony was the event in which each student was officially assigned to a class, such as archer, warrior, mage, or priest. The specialization depended on the individual abilities and natural predispositions of each one. Just as Ilya wielded the sword and followed the development tree focused on strength, he would also need to choose an appropriate path. Based on that choice, he would receive exclusive material compatible with his specialization. The only problem was that the same events were scheduled for both the boss and the main character. In addition, Elnor's trust level had risen to 5. He put his hands on his head, feeling that something truly grand was about to happen. Shortly after, the system informed that he had received a gift from Elnor. A skill was available to be copied. He could copy a skill from the selected target. Surprised, he thought, so I can copy a skill from the final boss. Using that now would be a huge waste. Although Elnor was already among the best in the academy, just like Ilya, the protagonist was still in the development phase. Later on, she would unlock several absurdly overpowered skills, so copying something at that moment would be premature. He needed to focus his efforts on the event that would occur in 3 days. Luckily, he knew crucial information that could guarantee his survival. As soon as night fell, he headed to the obsolete equipment depot using the Mask of Shadows, which increased his agility, and the cat paw slippers, which improved his stealth. He also ingested a speed potion to further enhance his mobility. After overcoming all the security measures, he found before him a place reserved for the most dedicated players, a true secret treasure collection point. He entered through the warehouse window stealthily and ate a cookie to recover his energy. It seemed like cheap third-rate advertising, but the effect really worked. Now it was time to explore carefully. He approached a huge pile of discarded objects and began to rummage through the heap. There was a lot of stuff there, but the most important item was exactly what he was looking for. The Divine Ultima, a sensor that emanated an ancestral power hidden for millennia, was the true objective of his search. After collecting everything he needed, he prepared to leave discreetly. Suddenly, however, the huge pile of scrap began to tremble because of the sensor. It was the one that kept the entire structure stabilized. Horrified, he raised his eyes and followed the dangerous shifting of the boxes. When the entire mountain of junk collapsed over him, he thought in fright that he should have known that nothing would be that simple. A loud crash echoed through the depot. He survived the impact, and to his surprise, a girl fell directly into his arms. It was Yura. He stared at her in shock upon recognizing Yura Greyhounder, the boss of Chapter 2, known as the Goddess of the Cursed Sword. The item he had originally taken belonged to her, which explained why she frequented that place so constantly. As soon as the girl opened her eyes, she immediately moved away from him and disappeared into the shadows, while the system emitted a threat alert. Since the risk was to his life, the desperate survival mode was activated at level EX. Yura quickly appeared behind him, and still trying to locate her with his gaze, he apologized for having woken her. He tried to explain what he was doing there, but she brandished the weapon without hesitation, and a deafening crash echoed through the depot. Heavy chains pierced through the boxes, reducing them to splinters. Dao barely managed to dodge the blade, leaning his body backward and blocking the attack with the sensor, producing an intense metallic clang. If before it had been only a duel against Ilya, now the situation was literally life or death. Nervous, he clenched his teeth and cast a firm look at Yura, and when she was preparing to attack again, he raised his hands and exclaimed that she was understanding everything wrong. He assured that he had no intention whatsoever of doing anything while she was sleeping. Despite his previous strength, his entire body already ached, and he needed to end that fight as quickly as possible, but the girl showed no intention of listening to him. She spun the chain again, forcing him to jump to avoid the blow. Next, she attacked once more, this time with even more fury. Fortunately, the protagonist knew the pattern of that specific attack. He stepped back a few steps until he touched the wall, and when she launched the blade again, the tip stopped just a few centimeters from his face. The maximum range was 3.5 steps. Any enemy within that radius would be hit without fail. However, at that moment, she could not advance a single step further. That was the central mechanism of her curse. However, escaping was also impossible in that suffocating situation in which any movement could be the last. The girl ordered him to take one step closer, and he asked why, if it was so that she could kill him more easily. She confirmed without hesitation, and in the heavy silence that followed, a loud rumble was heard coming from her stomach, breaking all the tension in an almost embarrassing way. An idea immediately arose in Dao's mind, fast as a flash of survival. That was her personal area, a space where no one else had permission to enter. Not even the teachers appeared there, which only reinforced the obvious suspicion that she had been going hungry for some time. He then offered a cookie, and she replied irritably that she would not fall for that ridiculous trick. Was he really trying to bribe her with food, as if that would solve everything? But the instant he tossed the cookie in her direction, she snatched it from the air with impressive reflexes, like a starving little dog that pretends dignity but cannot resist the smell. By all indications, she was really very hungry, and the situation was beginning to become less deadly and more embarrassing. After chewing in silence, she admitted that perhaps she should not have attacked him like that, and he thought that arguing with someone hungry was practically asking to lose. He sighed in relief for still being alive, and she asked who he was and what he was doing there in that isolated place. In fact, he was there to steal, but obviously he could not confess something like that. He then said that they had entrusted him with the responsibility of bringing food to her. He added that an acquaintance had asked him to take care of her discreetly. When she asked who that so-called acquaintance was, he thought that, if he handled that the right way, he could turn the situation into something advantageous in the future. Yura normally does not appear so early in the game's story, which made that encounter even more delicate. He said that her sister was living well in the Sacred Empire, and that she did not need to worry so much. The Emperor still showed no interest in either of them, but it was evident that keeping a low profile continued to be the best choice. After promising that he would return, he moved away, reflecting that Yura truly belonged to the Sacred Empire, and that her fate was far more tied to politics than she imagined. The reason she had been forced to hide in the academy was directly related to the Emperor of the Sacred Empire and to the cruel decisions that came from above. Yura's sword was known as an infamous tool of the forces of evil, carrying a dark weight that few dared to face. Because she was linked to the vessel of that sword, she carried a curse divided into 3 stages, each more severe than the previous. For that reason, he concluded that telling her about the situation of her only remaining family member might be a way to give her some hope amid the chaos. She had already endured too much suffering, and her hope was reduced to almost nothing. A new day dawned, and Director Adalante gathered all the first-year students for a guided tour of the facilities. They climbed a high hill from where it was possible to see all the academy buildings spread out like a small organized kingdom. She explained that, during the admission ceremony that would occur in a few days, each one should choose a secondary specialization area. The options included cavalry, magic, engineering, craftsmanship, and theology. It was important that everyone familiarize themselves with these faculties before making any hasty decision. One of the students asked if the tribal associations of the Sacred Empire shared the same values taught there. Adalante confirmed and added that they taught about intensity in battle and the dogmas of the Great Temple, making it clear that there was no reason to even consider transferring to another academy. After that, she laughed lightly and decided to deepen the explanation about the main faculties, clearly satisfied with the class's attention. The protagonist, however, was not paying the slightest attention to the speech. That was merely a tutorial event where the player received basic information about the structure of the world. It was a pity that he could not simply ignore everything, because otherwise all the progress accumulated up to that point would have been useless. One of the students pointed to the horizon and asked if that was the famous Void Zone, awakening general curiosity. The gazes turned toward the enormous dome in the distance, and Adalante explained that it was a forbidden area. She warned that anyone who approached too closely would be severely punished. Dao knew exactly what that place represented. It was a remnant of the ancient war fought between hell and heaven. It was there that the messengers of the gods, warriors blessed with divine powers, managed to stop the advance of the demons. Hundreds of years had passed, but the clash between the energies of light and darkness still persisted in that space. That zone was of extreme importance in case the demons ever managed to break free again. For that reason, the Sacred Empire, the tribal alliances, and the neighboring empire formed the so-called Golden Triangle to keep everything under control. That triangle included Alfonte and other strategic powers of the region. Luca raised his hand and asked the director if they could approach a little closer to the dome to observe it up close. Adalante reflected for a moment and replied that remaining at the edge of the protective barrier created by a seraph would be acceptable. She guaranteed that they would be safe within that limit. MC smiled discreetly as he was already beginning to structure a plan for that day. Taking a walk, eating something, and returning would be the ideal script to avoid raising suspicion. However, what he really had in mind was something much more ambitious and risky. An angel known for moving mountains and drying oceans, together with a higher-level seraph, had created that colossal barrier. Thanks to that monumental power, the academy could exist peacefully beside such a dangerous zone. Adalante led the students to a cliff near the barrier, and announced that they would take a break for a snack, which immediately lifted the class's mood. It was the perfect moment to put the plan into practice. Dao approached the director and asked if he could eat a little away from the other classmates. He explained that he felt uncomfortable there in the middle of the crowd. Adalante, remembering that many students were still commenting on the incident involving him, allowed him to move away a little but warned him not to go too far to avoid serious problems. As soon as he distanced himself, one of the students who was watching him commented irritably that that country bumpkin was showing off just because he had received a little attention. Settling in an isolated spot, MC began to insert various items into the sensor, including crushed unicorn horn, phoenix feather, and coral berry, carefully preparing the ritual. The Supreme Divine was in fact a linkage sensor, something comparable to a magical phone capable of crossing dimensions. He blew on the device, directing the smoke forward, and it began to swirl in dense and unsettling spirals. He hoped he had not made any mistake in the preparation. After all, he had worked too hard to get there. The artifact allowed contact with entities that most people only dreamed of encountering. Soon the outlines of figures began to form in the smoke, and an intense flash blinded him while voices echoed from the other side of the newly opened portal. They were discussing among themselves about work, and what seemed to be the boss explained to the newcomer that leveling meant removing the excess with precision. The other replied that the ground was too hard but assured that his shovel was even more resistant. And then it became clear that those far from ordinary workers were in fact angels. The boss, upon noticing the presence of a portal nearby, asked who the person was who was observing them in such an insistent way. Because of that, the angels became uneasy to continue the work, since they were being watched as if they were under inspection. The boss then declared that if he at least remained silent, that would already be good enough. Anything would be better than someone getting in the way while they worked under pressure. He turned to the subordinate and, clearly displeased, asked why he was standing still like a statue. His shovel was not even moving, as if he had forgotten what it was for. The angel became agitated and began to dig immediately, while the master of ceremonies continued observing everything attentively. Suddenly, a shrill horn echoed through the place, cutting the air like a divine warning. A truck pulled up at the construction site, and the driver announced that the sacred clay bricks had arrived, adding that they needed to unload everything as quickly as possible. One of the workers asked how many bricks there were, and the driver replied that there were many indeed. When they pulled the cloth that covered the cargo in the truck bed, all the angels sighed in unison, clearly disappointed with the absurd quantity. While they unloaded the heavy material, the driver calmly decided to have a snack. An angel then asked why he was eating cloud cookies in the middle of the shift. He looked at her and asked, "Isn't she also a driver?" She replied that she was also a soldier, and he suggested that she save energy for when she was going to drive. Meanwhile, the boss was ordering sternly that his subordinate continue working without distractions. The superiors were far too busy, and he was the only one standing still doing nothing useful. The angel ran off, visibly nervous as if he feared getting scolded again. In the meantime, a colleague asked the woman if lunch had already been delivered, and she replied that the delivery was delayed. As soon as the transport was arranged, the food would arrive, so he should have a little more patience. Observing that unusual scene, Dao smiled and thought that the angels had solid reasons for not being condescending to anyone. Deep down, their community functioned like a well-structured military organization. There was a rigid hierarchy, filled with ranks and well-defined chains of command. In summary, each world in that game had its own particular rules and structures. An encounter with an angel normally only happens after the second chapter, and with a high-ranking angel, only much later in the story. He knew exactly what they needed, something simple and direct. He placed several boxes of food in front of the portal, wished everyone a good meal, and continued observing the angels expectantly. They noticed the offer and one of them turned to the boss, asking if they could ask for some of that food. Another colleague exclaimed indignantly that he had not even fulfilled the necessary conditions to receive any kind of clemency. What was he talking about after all? That he should get moving and go carry bricks instead of complaining. Dao then addressed the workers and asked if they would like a snack, since they must be exhausted from so much effort. It was evident that that heavy work drained even celestial energy. He took all the food to them, and when a small muffin appeared in the boss's hands, his expression lit up and he granted the subordinates a 10-minute break. Everyone began eating excitedly, calling him a kind young man, while he reflected on how the laws of that other world were quite different from those of the material world. For example, a single portion was enough to feed all of them as if it were a complete banquet. After eating until they felt satisfied, the boss sat next to the portal and commented that he had finally experienced such a luxury during work, asking that they grant him the same benefit again. The MC did not understand at first, and the angel explained that he was referring to the censor beside him. He had not come there by chance, right? He intended to bless him, therefore that he should hand over the object without fear. That he should clearly say what he desired, and within reason he would try to fulfill the request in the best possible way. He was surprised because he had prepared numerous arguments and strategies for a difficult negotiation. Could it be that in the original plot everything was that simple? The angel's face suddenly became serious, and he asked, is he wondering why he decided to come meet me so closely? Now he would tell him the reason. Dao immediately realized that it was a vision granted by divine power. The angel was capable of seeing someone's nature with just a glance. He read his thoughts and noticed that he was extremely well informed about that world. He possessed a special gift, but had never managed to fully develop it. This gift would be very useful in the future, so he should try to awaken it. The protagonist did not understand exactly what he was referring to. Perhaps he was talking about some deadly spell or hidden ability. The angel explained that the gift was much more powerful than it seemed, but the way it would be used would depend only on him. Because of this, there was a possibility that he would be captured by a cruel but loving monster. Dao became nervous upon hearing that and thought that after mastering the censor, he would need to reconsider all available strategies. He firmly believed that there was an ideal way to survive that story. Suddenly, the angel assumed the form of a handsome young man and commented that an ordinary person would be paralyzed with fear before that presence. But he remained calm, focused on seeking a viable strategy. He had understood the essence of the situation. He would become a great man in the future. There was probably no real reason to worry at that moment. Next, the angel returned to the appearance of a tired worker, stated that the blessing had already been granted, and thanked in an almost shy manner. Another angel who was listening to the conversation asked if they really had permission to reveal that kind of thing to a human. The boss ordered him to go back to carrying bricks, while the protagonist continued reflecting on the meaning of cruel but loving monster. In addition, he had still been called a great man. He wondered if they were not exaggerating too much by describing him like that. Before returning to work, the angel gave him a smile and advised him to believe in himself. He acknowledged that that could be the worst possible scenario. After that, the portal slowly closed, leaving Dao alone with his thoughts. He was only trying all that because he did not want to die in an absurd way. Even so, those words came from an angel, so he needed to reflect carefully on each of them. The system then informed that he had obtained a C+ rank Divine Ultima. The artifact contained the special power of a divine essence from another world and also included 2 abilities called Aheticism. This ability consumed a small amount of mana to temporarily increase his physical constitution. The cooldown time was 20 seconds, and the ability could also be improved through the Proof of Faith. The second ability, Sacred Barrier, consumes a small amount of mana to create a single-use defensive barrier, applying the Constitution effect and being able to be improved with stigmas. MC closed his eyes and thought that the angel had really granted him a useful blessing. The Constitution effect basically functions as a health indicator and directly influences his ability to survive in critical situations. Considering that his desperate survival ability can increase attributes in extreme moments, that would certainly have practical utility. But the most important thing of all was the possibility of improving the ability over time. In the game world, items that can evolve offer real and lasting advantages. Getting something like that right at the beginning was practically an absurd stroke of luck. The only problem was that these abilities required mana to be activated. For someone with average attributes, that seemed more like a distant dream than a reality. And since he still could not use mana properly, he would have to resort to improvised methods to compensate for that limitation. For that reason, he decided to head to the Monster Research Department. While organizing his thoughts, the young man in front of him explained something with evident impatience. Noticing that MC did not seem attentive, he asked if distraction was his specialty or just a hidden talent. He replied that he was listening attentively and returned the question, wanting to know if he had understood correctly what had been said. The young man confirmed that he had heard every word and reminded him that he needed to find a partner for the activity. He understands what that really means. Where exactly is his partner? He replied that his partner would arrive soon, and the young man laughed, questioning who would associate with someone so unknown. Dao stated that he was not lying and added that the place would soon be full of students. The young man, obviously incredulous, commented that perhaps his partner simply was not that popular. He discreetly looked at the clock and thought that following the original script, she would appear at any moment, and as predicted, a few seconds later Ilya finally appeared. Without noticing Dao immediately, she asked the attendant, "Is this the Monster Research Department?" Dao waved at her with a smile and thought that at first he intended to avoid any involvement with the protagonist, but now he had changed his mind, especially after the angel's enigmatic words. She seemed slightly surprised to see him there, and he asked if her earlier comment about wanting to get to know him better still stood. She scratched her head, visibly confused, and upon remembering the situations that implied her sympathy for Elnor, she smiled nervously and thought that he was simply incredible. Since his previous approaches had not worked, he decided to test the strategy of provoking jealousy, something she only knew by hearsay. Upon noticing her expression, the protagonist immediately understood that she was drawing completely mistaken conclusions. Without prolonging the embarrassment, the two entered the simulated dungeon together. When the first monsters appeared, Ilya asked with some hesitation if he was absolutely sure about what he was doing. He asked her to trust him without questioning. She wanted to be his friend, was that not it? She still remembered how she had threatened him when they met. She admitted that yes, although in the end it had been him who struck her first. He replied that if she really wanted to maintain the friendship after all that, she should follow exactly his instructions. Pointing toward the 9 o'clock direction, he warned about 3 monsters, allowing her to identify the wolf that would attack her and defeat it in time. Dao warned about another imminent danger, and in a short time the wolves were all eliminated. Next came the bats, fast and irritating. He explained that their weak point was the neck, that she should focus on the body and not waste strikes on the wings. She swung the sword repeatedly and, already irritated, asked if he could not stop giving orders and actually help. He replied that he simply could not intervene. Soon after, he warned about another danger emerging in the environment. 2 daggers were flying toward her, one from the left and the other from the right. She could dodge them easily, but she needed to wait for the exact moment, about 10 seconds. Upon noticing the blades, she followed his advice once again and threw them away at the right instant. He praised her and declared, "Now it is paralyzing poison. The tube is on the right, let her break it." She cut the tube precisely, dodged 3 arrows fired in his direction, and suddenly, Dao warned about an attack coming from behind. She turned quickly and blocked the blow of a huge monster that had leaped to attack her in the air. After that, she exclaimed irritably, saying that he seemed to know absolutely everything that would happen. Would it not have been simpler if he fought alone? Perhaps they would have advanced faster if they really worked as a team. In fact, he wanted to help her directly, but he was incapable of doing so. His character possessed terrible attributes in practically every category. There was no real threat coming from that simulation. Because of that, the desperate survival ability simply was not activated. Everything there was a controlled imitation, and his movements depended on pre-programmed patterns. Since the ability was not omnipotent, he needed to find a way to increase his own attributes. When he became distracted with these thoughts and saw Ilya running toward him with the sword raised, he smiled nervously, imagining if he had not exaggerated in the orders. But he soon realized that she was running to save him from an unexpected attack. She defeated the monster that had approached from behind him, and he stared at her in surprise. Soon after, confetti appeared from all sides, announcing the victory and a new record in the simulation. Ilya was visibly surprised by the result. She had fought practically alone and still broken the record, even though it was a dungeon designed for 2 participants. Despite the carefree appearance, the protagonist was an experienced veteran of the game, so he knew exactly who would attack, from where and in what way. He smiled and commented that they had been lucky in that attempt. The next area would be more difficult, but she should keep striving. He wished her good luck, which almost made her lose patience, but she managed to control herself. Meanwhile, the dean of the spell department, Percy, closely observed the duo's performance. She realized that they were doing better than expected. She had completed the challenge surprisingly quickly, so she really deserved special attention. The man clarified that he was referring to the young man named Dow Campbell. She raised her eyebrows, confused, and questioned, "Is that the swindler who caught her attention?" After all, in her eyes, he seemed to be merely taking advantage of the situation. Conrad replied that it was exactly that kind of attitude that deeply irritated him about mages. Percy did not like his comment at all and stated that the supposed heroine would not have broken the record without his decisive participation. Any idiot could perceive how strong that girl was. After all, she was always at the center of attention. But according to Percy, the true key to victory was him. He guided her with surgical precision, gave exact orders, and noticed every detail around. Each of his movements revealed a meticulous and strategic calculation. He acted as if he had already been on a battlefield hundreds of times, and then proposed a bet to his colleague. Soon after, his voice echoed through the loudspeakers of the simulation room. He introduced himself formally and said that he had considered it extremely interesting to observe them in action. He explained that he and the dean of the spell department had decided to make a bet. The challenge consisted of knowing whether the two could break the overall record among the freshmen. If they succeeded, Percy would commit to granting any request they made. Percy shot him a sideways glance, since that had not been previously discussed, and added that if that were a burden for them, she would not force them to anything. She acknowledged that their performance was already impressive, but winning would be practically impossible. MC replied confidently that they would handle the challenge, leaving Ilya completely confused by such certainty. Percy became indignant at his self-confidence, while Conrad declared that since they had accepted, he was betting on the success of the two and that they could begin immediately. Meanwhile, Elnor trained alone in the practice room, and when Beatrix decided to visit her, she was shocked by the level of destruction around. She commented that she understood that Elnor used the place to vent emotions, but that already seemed excessive. What was happening to her after all? Exhausted, Elnor asked for water, and when Beatrix tossed her a bottle, she explained that she only wanted to recover a forgotten memory. When she was a child, her mother had taught her those specific movements. Now she could barely remember them, so she repeated them tirelessly. She closed her eyes and reflected on the rumor that a demon ran in Tristan's bloodline. That dark rumor possessed 2 distinct interpretations. One spoke of a superhuman being, while the other described an insane monster that one day could break free, bringing uncontrolled violence and gradual loss of consciousness. Would that be the reason Tristan, despite his grand achievements, had such a short life? Beatrix asked, worried, if she was not exaggerating. Were those really all the thoughts that tormented her? Elnor took a sip of water and asked her not to worry, stating that she no longer thought about that. Beatrix decided not to press the matter, but Elnor wanted to know why so much sudden caution. She replied that there was nothing beyond that to worry her. She explained that she had only received information that she had requested to be communicated immediately. She had learned through her subordinate Dow that he had joined a heroine candidate. Elnor showed immediate interest and asked who that candidate was. Beatrix replied that it was Ilya Krunox, the same girl with whom he had already fought before. She asked, so that means they are forming a duo. Beatrix confirmed and added that it had probably occurred because the simulator required 2 participants. Elnor closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said that she understood perfectly, then asked her to take her there. Beatrix exclaimed that Elnor herself had stated she was no longer thinking about it. Even so, the girl decided to go to him. Meanwhile, the protagonist unsheathed his sword and Ilya asked what exactly he was planning to do. She recognized that he had skill, but questioned whether he really believed they could challenge the absolute record. He confirmed naturally, and she commented that his arrogance surpassed any reasonable limit. Why did he need to try so hard like that? He thought that, knowing the movement patterns of the simulator's illusory monsters, it would be simple to accumulate rewards, but he could not reveal that detail. He replied that all of that was because she was by his side, and she retorted saying that she did not believe that justification. Soon after, Conrad made contact asking if they were ready to begin. They could choose any difficulty level, but the higher it was, the higher the score obtained would also be. Without hesitation, Dao requested the maximum difficulty, and Percy sighed deeply, unable to believe what she was hearing. She appreciated competition, but that seemed excessive. The maximum difficulty approached dangerously close to real combat. There was a concrete risk of death. Even so, he stated that he was ready to try, and Conrad asked the colleague to configure as requested. The simulator was activated shortly after. Ilya began to observe the environment with redoubled attention, and MC asked her not to let nervousness dominate her. She was a heroine candidate, her destiny already seemed set. Percy, on the other hand, decided to serve herself tea and commented to Conrad that that was simply incomprehensible. She asked him not to pretend that it was the first time they had witnessed something like that. They had already done similar challenges with other freshmen. She insisted that this time the situation was different. There was a real risk of death. Conrad replied that everything would be fine. He believed that Dao had his reasons for taking such a risk, and if the situation became too critical, they would withdraw them immediately. Suddenly, a horde of monsters fell from the ceiling onto the students, and the man announced excitedly that massacre mode had been activated. Ilya cursed out loud. She hated that situation, but they had no alternative besides fighting. Percy sighed nervously while her assistant, almost crying, believed the simulation was about to end in disaster. Meanwhile, Dao entered combat with a confident smile since the system had detected a real life or death threat. A huge rhinoceros fell onto him from above. He concentrated intensely and with a single precise strike, defeated it instantly. Conrad exclaimed enthusiastically that he knew that would happen because it was exactly what he expected to see. She saw that. Percy, surprised, ended up spilling the tea she was holding. Ilya also exclaimed, now smiling, that she already knew he would manage it. MC advanced quickly among the monsters, defeating each one that appeared in his path. At the moment he knocked down an even larger creature, Percy exclaimed in surprise, how was that possible? He had been completely useless until that moment. Conrad replied that he was only hiding his true capabilities. He did not blame her for doubting. Anyone would have reacted the same way upon witnessing such an abrupt change in his abilities. As time passed, the monsters became stronger, but he also evolved at the same pace, as if they were growing together inside the simulation. Dao and Ilya continued fighting side by side against the creatures until, at last, only the final enemy remained, a gigantic spider. Ilya drove the sword into the monster's abdomen and made a quick signal for Dao to act. He propelled himself on her back, jumped high, and landed directly on the creature's head, then using the Tristan clan fencing technique called Lavalpil. After delivering several powerful strikes, he landed behind the monster with the precision of someone who had rehearsed that 1,000 times. Conrad exclaimed, enchanted that the strength of the two was simply incredible. They were breaking all the records before everyone's eyes. The monster was dead, it was true, but MC did not stop to think where the body would fall. Ilya called him in a hurry, warning about the danger. When he turned, he came face to face with the gigantic carcass of a spider plummeting right above him. Fortunately, the dean arrived in time and cut the spider's body into several pieces before he was crushed. After that, she announced enthusiastically that they had set a record that would hardly be surpassed in the coming years. They were defeating the challenges so easily that it seemed they were just trimming grass in the garden. Ilya was radiant when she looked at him and sincerely thanked him for the effort. He replied with a mocking smile and told Percy that that victory was his, and she teleported there with a very dissatisfied expression. Even unwilling, she delivered the promised reward to the two. The right to rent an item from the Vault of Visions and a request that she would have to fulfill. Ilya analyzed the receipt and commented that that was incredible, while Dao observed that not every novice would have such luck. She stated that she had realized that a long time ago. Then she asked why he always remained so calm. He really did not understand what she meant. She explained that, whatever happened, his expression always seemed to indicate that he had already predicted everything, and that repeated itself in any situation. He mentally replied that yes, because he knew the plot. Next, she extended her fist toward him and he raised an eyebrow, confused without understanding the intention. She smiled and said that friends usually greet like that. He sighed, wondering if that was serious, gave a fist bump to her hand, and the system informed that the probability of increasing the affection level had risen. He asked, is this normal? And she looked thoughtfully at her own hand before saying goodbye excitedly and running off. Elnor commented that she did not know whether the girl was friendly or just strange. MC agreed with a slight nod of the head. When he realized that it was the student council president who had said that, he was genuinely surprised. She asked if he liked the new girl. He became nervous, began choosing his words carefully, and thought that if the survival instinct had not been activated, perhaps she was not there to rip off his head. But what did that have to do with her? He was not anyone's boyfriend. Elnor stated that she would repeat the question only once more. Did he like the new girl? At that instant, the system detected a threat and he realized he needed to make something up quickly. He called her nervously, closed his eyes, and declared that, although he had trained with Ilya, during all that time he could only think about her. She found that unexpected. He sighed in relief and wondered what kind of absurd thing he was saying. Why would that work? He might even think himself an idiot, but it worked. She smiled slightly and asked, does he mean that he missed her, and he confirmed before she questioned the reason. He did not expect that question and ended up without an answer. In the end, he admitted that even he himself did not know why he missed her. She timidly touched her own hair, maintaining a calm posture, and asked him to forget that, perhaps moved by some affection she preferred not to explain. After all, she had saved his life on that train. That he remembered the priority opinion. He smiled nervously without understanding the meaning of the phrase. She handed him an envelope and told him not to make up stories in his head. She had only come to deliver that. He took the envelope and immediately a flood of thoughts took over his mind. What could that be? A love letter or an unexpected challenge? What exactly was it? None of that existed in the original story. Elnor commented that she intended to deliver it the next day but decided to do it at that moment. After that, she left saying that he should open it when he was alone, and he watched her intrigued. Upon returning to the dormitory and finally reading the letter, he realized that perhaps it would have been better never to have opened it. She wanted him to accompany her to the next day's freshman ceremony, something he had completely forgotten. Accompanying her itself would be simple. He would only need to stay by her side during the entire ceremony. The real problem was the consequences of refusing. Not only would the affection level decrease, but he could gain new enemies. He was pulled from his own thoughts by a knock on the door. It was Ilya. He opened a crack and commented that he already knew it was her, and she smiled, saying that he really was intelligent. She handed him another envelope and he asked, surprised, what that meant. She asked, has anyone ever given you something like this before? And he lied, saying no. He asked, what is this, sincerely hoping it was not another problematic invitation, and she winked, stating that it was a surprise. She had already made that decision during the battle in the simulator. She needed to apply because of the absurd rules of the student council president, but he should read the letter soon. After that, she simply jumped from the second floor and he called out to her, worried. When a scream echoed from down below, he covered his face with his hand and thought, why are there so many strange people in this world? Back in the room, he opened the letter and thought, what could it be? Another escort request, but a summons is also possible. After all, it is Ilya. She had said it was a surprise, and when he saw the content, he was horrified. It was another request to accompany her to the ceremony. The final boss against the protagonist of the game. What could be worse? In the original plot, it was not like this, and now the choice became cruelly difficult. If he chose Elnor, the protagonist would see him as an enemy, and if he chose Ilya, the final boss would start to hate him. In other words, his death was beginning to look like a scheduled appointment. An idea arose in his mind. Perhaps he should refuse both invitations. He really did not know what to do. Everything revolved around the growing interest that both were showing in him. Then, like an almost miraculous flash, he had a brilliant idea. He could accept both invitations at the same time. And so the day finally arrived. The students gathered in a large hall for the celebration. Ilya, in the middle of the crowd, sighed upon noticing how crowded the place was. It looked like a real pigsty full of elegant people pretending to have class. Even so, she smiled and thanked Dao for accompanying her, and he replied only with a discreet sigh. The two blended into the crowd while the real MC remained seated near the fountain. After all, the one who was circulating around there was nothing more than a walking clone that he had bought in the system shop. He spent all his points, but creating a double would certainly give him a great advantage. The system notified him about the launch of a new event called Double Date. He decided to accompany two ladies at the same time, as if that were the most sensible decision in the world. It seemed simply incredible in theory. The problem was that he could not be discovered until the end of the event. If he failed, he would receive a very unpleasant penalty. With the help of the system, he could monitor every step of his clone from a distance. He sent to Ilya the coldest and most impeccable version of a gentleman. Even with the hall crowded, he knew that the risk was still there. If someone saw him near the clone, the whole plan would collapse. For that reason, he chose a distant and controlled posture to avoid any unnecessary conversation that could ruin everything. Suddenly, a monstrous scream echoed through the hall and he almost jumped from the spot. A cage with an animal was taken to the center of the hall, and Dao, relieved, concluded that it was only some kind of monster. Perhaps they were displaying the creature for some experiment and later it would escape. If that happened, an event would be activated and it would be enough to survive the chaos. He opened the system shop and stared at an item called Pheromone, described as the scent of a true alpha male, and thought that it would work on both of them. Right. Unintentionally, he pressed the use button, and at that very moment Elnor approached him. He greeted her with a certain nervousness and noticed her nose contract slightly. As expected, she smelled it and asked if he was wearing perfume. He replied that the flowers in the hall had a delicious aroma, but she observed that that smell clearly came from him. Soon after, she smiled shyly and looked away, confessing that the perfume was almost driving her crazy. In silent panic, he began to fan himself and try to get rid of the smell as he could. The system coldly informed that the pheromone effect had been applied to Elnor. The target was trying her utmost to contain the attraction she felt toward him. Elnor sighed deeply and with a strange smile asked herself why she had not noticed that before. She concluded that he was much more masculine than he appeared. Those words left him horrified, and trying to distract her, he suggested that they go to the ceremony to try some local delicacies. She accepted, and he discreetly looked around, imagining that his clone and Ilya should have already met. Now he needed to ensure that the two groups would never cross paths. While Elnor tried to regain his composure, he hoped that nothing would get out of control. If he kept acting naturally, maybe everything would work out. He and the clone needed to keep up appearances and stroll with their respective companions. Upon spotting some snacks, he offered a piece to his companion, who accepted with a smile. He also offered meat skewers, aware that it was the worst possible choice for someone concerned about her own figure, but he needed to reduce the effect of the pheromone somehow. To his surprise, the result was exactly the opposite. She asked how he knew that was the kind of food she liked. It must have been just a coincidence. He mentally cursed and wondered if he should pretend that he himself did not even eat that. She looked at him smiling and asked if it was really that hard to resist that kind of meat. He remained silent, torn between the desire to maintain a peaceful relationship and the urgent need to keep his distance. Besides, he could not run into Ilya under any circumstances. Elnor approached a souvenir shop and realized that they also sold bracelets there. Nothing seemed to please her. Even so, he said he wanted to buy something for her, although she claimed she liked nothing. He soon wondered why he had said that, since his goal was to reduce her attraction and not feed it even more. He then decided to choose the worst possible gift, a simple button. He showed the object and asked if she liked it, but the pheromone's effect was still far too strong. She replied that she could use it on her uniform, as if it were something truly special. Getting rid of her was becoming an almost impossible task. After that, they decided to have a snack more calmly. The pheromone's effect finally seemed to be decreasing. She asked if he had already decided which field of study he would pursue. He replied that he was thinking about applying to the theology faculty, and she questioned whether he would not reconsider, given the abilities he possessed. According to her, it would be a waste not to try the Knights Academy. He explained that he wanted to learn something specific in theology, and that was why he had made that choice. She showed interest and asked what exactly he wished to study, and he replied that he needed to learn to protect something precious, and that perhaps he would find the answer there. She wanted to know what he intended to protect, and he thought that at the very least he needed to protect his own life from the impact she caused. Divine abilities would be ideal both to survive and to reach the ending he desired. They were essential for that. An incident involving a secret society was about to occur, and the leader of that chapter was especially vulnerable to divine powers. He said that since childhood there had been something he wished to protect, and she asked if that had any relation to the attraction he felt for her. She knew the Tristan family curse very well. She spoke about her own curse that drove her relatives into madness. Mental training alone would not be enough to avoid that fate. Her expression darkened and she asked if he knew another method. He replied that the blessing of an angel could be an alternative. It was said that when two archangels granted their blessing to someone, it became a true miracle. Elnor already knew this method and commented that it was extremely difficult to achieve. Because of that, despite the great achievements of the Tristan family, they still lived under constant fear. Then she asked why he continued by her side. She wanted to know why he always appeared when attempts on her life happened. She also asked what his true intentions were. He paused briefly to choose his words carefully and confessed that what he wished to protect was her. She frowned and questioned who she was to him to deserve such protection. He replied that if he were not by her side, she could die. She remained silent, clearly suspicious, and he insisted that he was telling the truth and that there were no ulterior motives. She commented that she had already suspected that from the beginning, but that he was still a very strange guy. He replied that he heard that often and sighed deeply, aware that he had been completely sincere. He hoped that explanation would be enough to satisfy her curiosity. Meanwhile, Ilya and the clone had moved away to an isolated place, a dark basement full of cages with trapped monsters. Since Dao had hardly spoken with her, Ilya presumed he was upset and tried to lighten the mood by saying that by some strange miracle, the two of them had ended up precisely in that basement. She cast a discreet glance at him and thought she needed to get closer if she wanted to discover more about the Tristan family. But she did not even know how to start a conversation with that guy. In fact, that applied to any boy, which left her deeply irritated with herself. She then decided to pay attention to the environment and realized that there were several monsters nearby. She commented that it seemed the creatures were being used in academy experiments, but that the teachers were far too irresponsible to leave something like that abandoned in the basement. They simply abandoned all that horror down there as if it were something trivial. As she passed by one of the cages, she noticed some enormous specimens and turned to observe more closely. She approached one of the bars again and analyzed the beast more carefully, wondering if it was really well chained. Suddenly a light flashed beside the structure. There was an explosive device attached to the iron bars and she realized it too late. The explosion echoed through the basement. Dao grabbed her at the same instant and leaped aside, protecting her from the impact. In the ceremony hall, all the students heard the blast and felt the building tremble under their feet. The clone, already badly damaged, absorbed most of the impact. The flames burned his back, but he remained bent over the girl to protect her. She asked, surprised, why he was doing that, and he replied that it was his mission. Soon after, he lost his strength and fell to the ground. She stood up and looked at him, confused. She wanted to ask about that so-called mission, but that definitely was not the appropriate moment. The monsters were loose. Baring their teeth, the creatures advanced ready to attack her, and she grabbed an iron pipe from the floor while thanking Dao for having saved her. Now it would be her turn to protect him. Meanwhile, the system notified the real Dao about a new urgent task. The monsters had escaped. He needed to eliminate them. If many people died, he would receive a severe penalty for the scenario. As a reward, he would gain an exclusive material for equipment. He ran toward the basement and told Elnor that he needed to resolve something immediately. He asked her to find a priest in the meantime. Confused, she tried to make him wait, but he insisted that she wait and fulfill what he had asked. The students needed to be protected. Upon entering the basement, the first thing he did was undo the clone and call Ilya, asking anxiously, "Were those all the monsters?" Ilya, who had already defeated most of the creatures, commented that it was good that he had appeared. The system informed him that her curiosity had evolved into interest. The main scenario had been altered. She explained that a particularly large monster had escaped, and he thought nervously that it could only be that bear. She added that the creature was probably on the first floor. They needed to stop it as soon as possible, but before that she needed to catch her breath. Upon noticing the paleness on her face, he asked if everything was all right, remembering that now the main scenario was absolute priority. If he failed, the punishment would be unbearable. He could not allow that in any way. Meanwhile, the bear invaded the ceremony hall and the students were paralyzed with horror. A man raised a barrier in front of them and shouted that everyone needed to hold out until the arrival of the knights and professors, maintaining the barrier with all possible strength. The bear growled and began to strike the barrier with its paws, opening visible cracks in the structure. Elnor returned with a priest and exclaimed that neither the rector nor Professor Conrad were present, therefore they could not use the blessing of an angel in that situation. Indignant, she questioned whether he really considered himself a priest. There were students in danger there. The man replied that she was being disrespectful to a professor. A high-level technique like the blessing of an angel was not something accessible to just anyone. He sighed and stated that the knights would arrive in a minute, they only needed to wait. That was why, according to him, he had tried to prevent experiments with monsters. The Tristan family should not have such privilege. Elnor ground her teeth, irritated by those words. At that moment, Dao ran past, snatched the rosary from the priest's hands and said that he would borrow it for a while. The priest furiously ordered him to return it immediately, but Dao ignored him and advanced toward the bear that was destroying the barrier. The professor shouted that he was just an ordinary student. Did he even know how the blessing of an angel worked? Dao combined the supreme divine power with the rosary and released the asceticism and the sacred barrier skills. As he approached the monster, the system detected a lethal threat to his life. The desperate survival skill was activated at X level. He threw himself to the ground and slid across the carpet between the bear's legs, while the man responsible for the barrier asked anxiously, "Why is he not running away?" And he replied that he needed to buy time. "Take the students away while I hold it." The bear struck violently, and he activated asceticism, converting all additional attributes into constitution. Then he raised a sacred barrier in front of himself to block the attack. The impact made him stagger, but he managed to remain standing. Everyone around was in shock. That was the blessing of an angel. The bear continued attacking to break the defense, but Dao remained firm while the floor behind him cracked from the blows. While everyone wondered how an ordinary student possessed such power, Elnor watched him with silent admiration. The priest put his hands on his head and shouted that he was a complete idiot. Did he know that even a high-ranking priest needed to pray non-stop to use that technique? Elnor thought that finally everything made sense. Nothing else could surprise her. She had already seen him hide his true potential more than once. The priest shouted in frustration, asking why that monster could not break the barrier. But before he could continue, someone struck him on the nape and he fainted. Ilya asked, with disdain, if he really could be called a professor. He was good for nothing. Elnor turned to Ilya and she apologized for knocking him out. That idiot was completely useless. The girl asked why she had taken so long, and Elnor replied, still out of breath, that she had fainted in the basement and had only now regained consciousness. After catching her breath, she turned her gaze to Dao and realized that he could use the blessing with impressive skill, even without being a priest. They say that decades of training are necessary to reach that level. How was that possible? Elnor was immersed in her own thoughts. Decades of practice are necessary to release that much energy. She remembered that he had said he wanted to study at the theology faculty. He would die if he did not protect her. There was no other reason. Her heart began to beat faster. Ilya commented that even if that were an accumulated blessing, there should be a limit to how much he could endure. How lucky she was. Elnor did not understand the comment, and Ilya explained that it was obvious that he did all that for her and for the Tristan family. Elnor turned to look again at the boy who was struggling to contain the monster. When Ilya stated that he had no reason whatsoever to risk himself that way, Elnor realized that she already knew the answer. During all that time she had felt lost in the darkness. Then a small beam of light emerged. Now watching that scene, her heart beat so strongly that it seemed to want to leap out of her chest. She unsheathed the sword abruptly and thought about how strange all of that was. Then she advanced to attack and to everyone's surprise, leaped high, positioning herself above the monster. She raised the blade over her head and delivered a powerful strike against the beast. A deafening roar echoed through the hall. The enormous creature was forced to the ground and Dao looked at her, surprised. When the pressure lessened, the bear rose with difficulty and let out another fierce roar. Upon observing Elnor's movements, Dao immediately recognized the true sword technique of the Tristan family. She advanced several times, delivering fast and precise blows, and only stopped when blood began to gush from the monster's mouth. Afterward, she changed stance, slid along the creature's side, and executed a semicircular strike with her exclusive technique. The beast was thrown several meters backward. Then there was another roar accompanied by an explosion. Dao realized that that technique was at a completely different level from the version he had copied. That was normal. In the original plot, Elnor did not interfere. The system then notified him about an extraordinary achievement. The monster had been defeated without there being a single casualty. There were only 30 seconds left until the arrival of the knights. He thought that all the professors who insisted on conducting experiments with live monsters were allies of the Tristan family. If Elnor intervened personally, she would practically be assuming responsibility for the acts of her own family. Normally, she avoided getting involved in political disputes. So why had she decided to act at that moment? He was confused and just wanted everything to end soon so he could think calmly afterward. Meanwhile, Ilya guided the students to the exit and everyone was safe. With the battle apparently finished, Elnor lowered the sword and declared that it was over, but it was still not the end. Dao suddenly warned her about something behind her. A partially burned bear emerged from the flames and advanced furiously. She turned immediately. With no time to react, Dao activated the sacred barrier once again. The monster leaped at him and delivered a devastating blow. This time, however, Dao could not resist and lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, he was confused, because a second earlier he was fighting to protect Elnor and now he found himself lying on a bed. Adalante, noticing his lost expression, explained that the monster had been defeated and that Elnor was also fine. He was surprised. The headmistress herself was sitting in front of him. She smiled slightly and added that all the other students were also unharmed. Was he that surprised by her visit? She commented that she had not yet had the opportunity to talk to him since the incident of the novice duel. He replied nervously that he did not mind the visit and that he knew she was Adalante's swan song, an immortal who had lived for 1,000 years. Why would someone like her wish to see him? It would not be because of the angelic blessing he had used, would it? She explained that she had come to bring rather unpleasant news. She closed her eyes for a moment and asked where she should begin. He asked her to start with the bad news and she stated that he had attracted more attention than any other student of the academy. No student had been involved in as many incidents as he had. Based on her experience with the bad luck that surrounded him, he would probably continue getting into trouble. Dao thought that he did not do that on purpose, but what could he do about it? Adalante then changed the subject and asked how much he knew about demons. What a curious reaction, Dao. He really did not care about the topic raised by the headmistress. He sat on the bed and said that he saw no need to reveal everything he knew and that even if he wanted to, he had no idea what she intended to do. She approached and asked what he meant by that. He replied that he was the only student who had not yet been assigned to a class. He could not even attend the lessons. She commented that it was evident that he was not satisfied with that situation. She snapped her fingers and added that she needed to deal with the consequences of the numerous incidents involving him. She did not know if he was aware that the current hegemony no longer exercised so much control over society. The political moment was not favorable to them. There were factions willing to do anything to attract talents even if they needed to snatch them by force. He said the tribal association's coup, the changes in the structure of the Holy Roman Empire and the issue of the heir to the throne. All of this is connected to them, isn't it? They are the reason behind everything that is happening. She looked at him surprised and thought that he was more informed than he appeared. She confirmed that he was right and explained that for now the Golden Triangle pretended to be a friendly neighbor, but behind that facade there was a fierce dispute for talents. Most students did not even realize it. He agreed and stated it is true because of this dispute the entire continent already feels the consequences. All the incidents in which he had been involved would certainly attract the attention of those forces. Even so, no one had taken any direct measure. That was strange, unless someone was deliberately blocking the flow of information. She crossed her arms and reflected in silence. So he also possessed a sharp mind for politics. He asked, does that mean that if he attracts their attention it will be dangerous? And she answered firmly, exactly, and the world may be destroyed. The next instant she showed him terrifying images and raising a symbol before him, asked if he knew everything about that seal and commented that that was why she had asked about demons. He thought the rubber seal, and she silently questioned whether he really also knew what it was about. The so-called Rubber Organization was a secret group of demon worshippers, a sect whose ultimate objective was to bring demons into this world. She explained that they had already acted in the incident of the attempted assassination of Elnor, and also in the case of the monster that escaped, where everything indicated their influence. Both incidents had the Tristan family as the target, and there was no guarantee that a third attack would not happen. The protagonist asked why she was telling all that to him. She replied that she could not reveal the reason, but asked that he accept the responsibility without asking further questions. Then she handed him the interdimensional key. The protagonist held it and thought an unbalanced item capable of opening doors to other worlds, while she watched his reaction attentively. Was it really that obvious that he knew what it was about? She said that he needed to take good care of that and show progress, because if she became satisfied she might even present him with something more. Then she snapped her fingers and made him reappear lying on his own bed. Before leaving, she asked him to keep that conversation an absolute secret. He replied, all right. She walked to the kettle, poured tea into a mug with all the calm in the world, and asked how he was doing with Lady Elnor and the hero candidate. He thought, did she really need to ask that? Even so, he answered, everything is fine. She approached and said that she hoped it would continue exactly like that. He asked, why do you insist on this so much? She smiled in an almost amused way and replied, because if he does anything stupid the world ends. Then she showed that horrible vision again and he brought his hands to his head, shouting once more. He thought, why is this world so absurdly fragile? She laughed and stated that she was not lying about anything. In silence, she thought that their plan could only be completed if the three remained together, and sometime later the protagonist was already walking down the corridor. He looked at the key in his hands and murmured, the end of the world I will deal with later. Who would have imagined that she would set such a trap for him? An ordinary player would never lay hands on such an absurd item. It even seemed that no one else cared about the original plot of the story. At that moment, Conrad approached saying that he had finally found him, and the professor commented that he had been looking for him. Dao asked he was looking for me, why? And the professor explained that even without having been officially assigned to a class, he could not continue skipping lessons, so he handed him a temporary assignment letter. The protagonist read the letter while the professor added that starting the next day he would have classes with that specific group. He widened his eyes when he saw the names. On the letter it was written Student Council President Elnor, Vice President Ilya. He murmured, now yes, this definitely smells like the end of the world. Sometime later during class the professor explained that the sword could be considered a versatile weapon for almost any situation. He then pointed the chalk at the board and asked how to deal with obstacles in combat. At that moment Elnor asked to speak, saying that she had a question, and the professor replied that she could speak. Lady Elnor questioned whether he did not think he was relying too much on theory and if he really believed that so much information would be useful in a real fight. He looked at her surprised and asked her to repeat. She stated that in real combat even an experienced knight could be defeated by someone with a long-range weapon. The professor agreed and told the students that that was true. Elnor added that unless someone had trained to exhaustion they would need to complement their skills with shooting and throwing training. Elia commented that curiously she thought the professor was right. Elnor countered saying that using the environment in his favor, a swordsman could dodge projectiles more easily, and if the enemy got close he would never be disarmed. Elia asked what would happen if the distance advantage could not be nullified by cover, and reminded that that was precisely why close combat classes existed, stating that Elnor should understand the difference between theory and practice. Elia then said that the professor should continue the class. Even being forced to be there, Elnor could not simply remain silent. She replied with a dry thank you, and indignant declared that as student council president it was her responsibility to ensure the quality of the education offered to the students. Elia frowned and said that in that case she should not interrupt the professor all the time, asking why Elnor always needed to meddle. At that instant the protagonist asked them to continue the class, but Elnor reprimanded him, saying that he should not pretend to believe that all that theory was really useful. Elia retorted that at the very least it seemed more useful than her constant criticisms. She stated that she was absolutely certain of that. She added that it was unbelievable that a hero aspirant could not distinguish advice from insults. The protagonist repeated, "Can you continue?" Elia leaned toward him and declared radiantly, That's right, the victory is mine. She knew that Dao would stay by her side. Elnor adjusted a lock of hair and letting out a controlled sigh said that that had been only a small defeat and that the professor could continue. The professor stated that he understood the situation and suggested that they move on to the practical part of the class. The protagonist thought that it was always like that because of those two. All the other students ended up looking at them as if they were watching a spectacle. Seated exactly between a hero candidate and members of a ducal family, he decided that it did not matter and that he would focus only on his own task. Then he observed the system window that said Elnor Trust Level 5, Sympathy Level 1 reward available to claim. He thought, wow, how wonderful. The next window showed House Tristan fencing technique. Basic efficiency 58%, traditional technique of the renowned ducal House Tristan. The text explained that the user could utilize that technique effectively using any weapon. It also informed that the basic deep breathing technique significantly increased physical stamina and vigor. The skill possessed excellent synergy with the Tristan family fencing technique. The protagonist reflected on how those two skills worked perfectly together. Added to the physical bonus, they formed an incredibly efficient combination. The only person capable of extracting the full potential of that combination was Elnor. Her terrifying close combat abilities were precisely the reason she had become the final boss of the story. He then turned his attention to the next system window. On it was written, Ilya, Curiosity Level 5, Interest Level 1, Reward Available. That is all for today. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you will always know when a new video comes out. With that said, until the next video.